What's going on, running fans, jumping fans, throwing fans, all around athletics fans? Welcome to Talking in Ovals. I'm Alex Cuesta. My partner in crime over there is Dave Hyatt. As always, what's going on, Hyatt?
Not much. It was actually weird to have a weekend without some earth-shattering track times being run somewhere.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like it. It felt weird. It felt weird.
It's a weird time where we're like, there were some places where some outdoor meets started, but we're kind of at that weird time where we're in between. Give everyone some rest after a crazy indoor season, and I'm so pumped for where it's all going to go from here.
I'm going to start a campaign now. Next year at this exact lull period, we need to have some superstar go for some ridiculous world record just to keep everybody happy, because either you get a world record or you just get a ridiculous time. So it's always like fun to do that. So I'm pushing for that now because I don't like the lulls. But before we get into anything fun, today is Monday, March 20th of 2023. Please like, share, follow, subscribe, rate 5 stars on Spotify and iTunes. Spread this word of mouth. Go look for us on the socials at Talking in Ovals. And like Dave said, it's been a slow period, so we don't have any PRs, PBs for this week. But before we jump into this show, I want to encourage everyone to go back to last week's show. We had Scott Clayman. He's a former Asbury Park Press and digital sports writer. He was a peer of Hyatt's, competing against him. You got to hear some amazing short conference B South, A South stories of those two going at it. And also, he used to write about me when I was actually a fairly decent runner. That was many, many moons ago now, but it was just cool for us to both walk down memory lane, especially Dave. You guys jumped in and had some good conversations there, Dave. It was lots of fun last week.
I mean, I had to let him know that even though his team was good, mine always beat him. So, it's just kind of how it was. But I also had, Chris Greer, Steve Geiger. They were all on my high school team. So,
yeah. It was definitely a fantastic show. But this week, Dave, we have another awesome show. Our guest this week is Julie Culley. She is a mother to 3 boys, 6.5, 4.5, and 1.5. She's an Olympian. She's graduated North Hunterdon in 1999, Rutgers in 2004, Rutgers Hall of Famer in 2016, and is a former D1 director of track and field over at the prestigious University of Georgetown. I'd say she doesn't have that many accomplishments. What's going on, Julie?
I know. Well, when I wrote that out to this morning, I was like, oh, please don't read all of those. You can just say I'm a mom. That's the pride and joy.
Yeah, obviously it is. We're all parents here, but I had to give it all because there's nothing wrong with flaunting some of it, right? When you have so many accomplishments, when you've done great things, and it's funny, we just fit Olympian in there. This is the running show and Olympians smothered in with so many other great things. But no, you have a lot of accolades, and we didn't even mention you are a running store owner, you and your husband, and a national champion. You have so many things that we're going to get into a bunch of it. But I want to start where we start with every single guest. And so far, Hyatt, this hasn't gotten redundant yet, so we're going to keep doing it. I want to start to talk to you, about where the running journey began for you. Where did you start running? And then, all of us have our own times when we kind of got the spark, right? Where it was kind of like, man, I think I could do this for a long time, and this is pretty cool. When did you get that spark of just running for fun, and then it clicks into, I really want to do this as my main sport?
Yeah, such a great question. I got my start, I think, similar to how a lot of individuals do, which was through soccer. I was a midfielder, never had to get pulled off the field. My coach was like, you never get tired, just keep her in. And I played varsity soccer my freshman and sophomore year of high school. So that was my first love. And then I did track in the outdoor season, basically to keep myself in relative fitness. I didn't really do much in the winter season, so that didn't go so well in those first 2 seasons of track. But I started to get the bug. I crossed over from soccer into cross country my junior year. And my senior year was the first year I did cross country, indoor and outdoor. I actually did theater in the winter season. So I did theater my sophomore year, junior year, and senior year alongside of indoor track. So that was my deconditioning period, which always made outdoor track a little bit more interesting. But I always what's interesting for me is, and I think that I acknowledge this too, like I'm just an incredibly competitive individual. And so where I was going to be good is where I wanted to be. And so when I started to see that I could accelerate in track, like full transparency, it was like, oh, I like being good, so I'm going to move into this space. And I think there's a lot of people who are lifelong runners and they run for the pure joy of it. I always ran to see how good I could be. So I have a different relationship with running now. I've coached, I've been on all different sides of the sport. But now I only run just a little bit. I just run to clear my head, just a couple miles, a couple days a week. I have a husband, on the other hand, who loves running just for the pure joy of it and runs all the time and as much as he possibly can because he just loves it. And I'm like, oh, I just don't. It just don't feel the same.
And for those who don't know, North Hunterdon is a distance running powerhouse in this state. I mean, they've had Brendan Heffernan on the boys' side. My senior year, Chris Robinson won MOC, just an absolute powerhouse on the boys and girls' side. So what was it like to go to a program that was so rich in tradition and had so much wonderful history?
Yeah, it was so neat to be there. When I came into the program on the track side is when those guys were running really, really well. And you hear about the names. Brad Hudson is from our high school. Anne-Marie Lauk is from our high school. And Pat Tyson, who's the coach of Gonzaga University and, former Oregon Duck, told me once that there's only two, and I don't even remember who the other set is, of individuals who've ever come from the same high school and made the Olympic team the exact same event. So we are one of those high schools. So Anne-Marie Lauk made the Olympic team in both the marathon and it was Anne-Marie Lecco at the time. But she made the Olympic team in the marathon and in the 5K. And then I followed in her footsteps a couple years later.
Pretty incredible. That's ridiculous. The depth there. Yeah.
Oh, they were a powerhouse. Especially, I mean, I could speak more from the boys' side, but they were a tough out, man. They were so good.
So, what's interesting? You're not the first guest that we've had that was flat out like, I was good at it. I started winning and that was it. And I remember being a coach for a little in high school and Evo over at Marist College where I ran. I was always looking for the midfielders in soccer because I played soccer. I was a center mid. I was the same thing. I was a center mid or an attacking sweeper. So it was always running up and down the pitch from 18 to 18, covering it all. And, I translated into middle distance. So I would always look for those soccer players that maybe were center mids and not playing a lot. And it's like, hey, want some glory? I bet you I could turn you into a sub 800 meter runner. Let's go. So it was, it was always fun. And a lot of our guests got their start from other sports. And it's always, it's going to give me good conditioning. And then it's like, oh, wait, I'm a girl and I just broke 18 in the 5K and that wasn't hard. And I feel like I can run a lot faster and it just snowballs from there. So that's really cool. We get a lot of that. And it's awesome that we have people
a lot of it is
sports and jump in.
And a lot of it is soccer seems to be the main sport. But I remember when we had on Sarah Slattery, she was a swimmer, you know, but it's all more cardiovascular type sports, which is cool.
It certainly is. Now, Julie, I want you to take us a little more down memory lane because I asked you about your spark, but now I want you to just, look at your career, which is expansive. But I want you to jump in from, when you started doing it in high school, through college at Rutgers, becoming an Olympian, even going into coaching and directing. What have been some of your favorite memories that you have gotten from the sport? Kind of give us some cool stories, some fun memories, because I think that's one of the best parts that we get from this show is letting you guys really think back and unlock some of the things that you haven't thought of in years.
You probably should have asked me about memories prior to having 3 kids because my memory is half gone now. No, I mean, I've had an incredible journey, and I've been very lucky to have some really great mentors along the way. So in high school, I had Don Roberts. He was the women's coach at North Hunterdon at the time. He was New Jersey State Teacher of the Year, like overall Teacher of the Year. He was our Shakespeare teacher at North and was the most dynamic character, and just like fostered a love and passion for the sport with all of us. And I mean, I had no interest in running, but I was like, I'm going to run for that guy. I will never forget coming into my junior year of when I was going out for cross country for the first time. And I know this is the experience of many, but just didn't run over the summer at all. I had a tendency to do that. I had a little bit of a difficult time with discipline in the beginning. I just love to play. Like, I love to play sports, and I love to go to practices and stuff. I just wasn't someone, and I don't know that that was part of our culture when we were younger as well. But I will never forget that first day of practice. I thought I could fake it. I tried to like run around my house a few times, I think the day before practice started, to see if I could. Oh my gosh. And he just looked at me and he was like, "You didn't do anything, did you?" And I was like, "Nope. How can you tell?" I was like overweight and just so deconditioned. I was like, but I was tanned and I had a great summer. So no, I quickly learned, because I think a lot of the first part of my career was like, and even through college, I just couldn't figure out the balance of it. So I would try to get in shape fast, and I would get in shape fast and get hurt even faster. And that was my high school career. So I was looking at I was being recruited by some solid schools, but certainly not when people look at like the trajectory of my career. I wasn't recruited by any of the top 10 universities at that time for women's distance running. Those were only dreams that you could see in the magazines for me. And a lot of that was just kind of those ups and downs and ins and outs of kind of learning myself and learning the sport. But the cool part about going to Rutgers, and it just was not a school that was even on my radar. I was like, I'm not going in state. I want to go to a private school. I was like such a snob. That was like the culture at my high school. And my mom made me talk to Rutgers, and I was like, I don't want to talk to the coach. I remember literally, like the phone, she's literally holding the phone. She's like, the Rutgers coach is on the phone. I'm like, I don't want to talk. I don't want to talk to Rutgers. And I got on the phone and I was like, she's amazing. Like, and it was
Did you include that in your Hall of Fame speech? Did you include the fact that you did not want to talk to them at all?
Oh my gosh, I should have. She was there. But she was incredible. And when I learned about who she was and what a pioneer in the sport she was, Roberta Anthus, I was like, and I'd never been coached by a woman before. So I was like, this is amazing. And then I came to campus and just instantly had friends. And I was like, yep, this is it. This is the spot for me. Much of my career was about the learning, ups and downs, lots of injuries, lots of parties. We had a great time at Rutgers, a great time.
Oh, yes.
We had a lot of talent on the team, and we usually all talked about how we were once talented in high school on the weekends. No, we had a lot of fun. And I had a great 5 years there. I stayed a fifth year, just to be able to finish up my eligibility. When you're injured a lot, you sit out a lot. But one of the coolest memories, and I did tell this story at the Hall of Fame, was my sophomore year. I qualified as an individual for NCAA cross country. So my sophomore year would have been 2000, and 2000 was held in Ames, Iowa. And it was, I think, the coldest cross country championships on record. There were gusts up to like -20. And I remember in Sports Illustrated that week, there were pictures of, I think it was like one of the Wisconsin guys had like literal icicles off of his beard in the middle of the race. And we spent a lot of time at a Denny's there. So we had breakfast many mornings at Denny's. And I'll never forget sitting there with Roberta afterwards. It was just she and I got my doors blown off. I was so cold. My body never warmed up in the race. And she said, you know, Julie, because I was fighting back tears, she said, if you can stick in sport long enough, the best years of your career are going to be in your late 20s and early 30s. And I was a sophomore. Like, I think I was 19 years old. And I just remember thinking, like, what? I have to run for that long to be great. But it stuck with me. It absolutely stuck with me because I left Rutgers and I was really burnt out. My career was just like I was on a season, off a season, on a season, off a season. And I would have these tastes of like how good I maybe could be. But then I would have a setback. And then it was like, you know, that whole process of, all right, here's the setback. I'm going to come back stronger and smarter. And I've learned more. And you bring that and then they have another setback. And so I left after my fifth year. And my fifth year, I was in a back brace that fall because I threw my back out carrying furniture into my apartment. Like when we were moving in that August was so ridiculous. And then I hurt my foot that spring. It was like more muscle related, but I couldn't run on it. So I left Rutgers I was tired. Like I had just been fighting. Twist of fate, I was supposed to, when I left Rutgers, I had come in on a half scholarship. And by the time I became a sophomore, I was on a full scholarship. So I felt very blessed to be in a position that I was coming out of school debt free. And so I was like, I've had so many people give to me, like I wanted to serve. And so I had gotten into AmeriCorps and I was supposed to be stationed in Denver starting in January of 2005. And then Roberta, my college coach, called like a couple weeks after I graduated and she's like, hey, there's an opportunity for a head coaching position at Loyola College in Baltimore. She's like, I know the AD, he used to be a basketball coach at Rutgers, like he's interested in talking to you. And I was like, what? I'm 22. There's 0% chance they're going to hire me. And of course it's like, they needed a women's head coach and they were willing to take a risk. So I think back on that moment, I literally took the interview because I thought that number one, I had never taken an interview before. I graduated from the business school. I'd never built a resume. I was like, I work at bagel shops in the summer and lifeguard and whatever. Like I didn't have an internship at that point yet. I was like, runnings's my internship. I just have to train. So I was like, I'll build a resume, I'll get a suit and I'll have my first interview and it'll just be like a good experience. And then a week later, they offered me the job. But that was a moment in time where had that not happened, I think I would have walked away from the sport.
That's incredible.
So, like, just being in the sport, like reignited the light in me again.
So you don't go the traditional route after college and go right into training to be a pro. You go into coaching.
Mm-hmm.
So when did you realize and start to make that transition from coaching into, I think that I want to get back out there and compete?
Yeah. I mean, I moved to Baltimore. I was 22 years old and man, it was a fun city to move to. It was cheap and there were a lot of young people and we had a lot of fun. It was bizarre coaching. I was the head coach of women and assistant coach to men, but the head coach of the men was part-time because they didn't have a full men's program. They only had cross country. So he had a full-time job. So many days of the week, it was me and the guys and the girls. And I'm like, I'm literally like 3 months older than one of the oldest like guys and girls on this team. So I was like, Julie, you cannot go out with them. You cannot socialize with them. You have to be an authoritative figure. And it was actually awesome. And the AD, he has since passed away. He actually was one of the color commentators up at Rutgers the last couple of years for basketball. He was just such a good person. And so he took care of me. Like, he made sure our program was moving in the right direction. And it kept me involved, right? So I was there from 2004 into 2005 season, and then 2005 into the 2006 season. And I was at an indoor meet in the 2005-2006 season. So it would have been, early 2006. Yeah. And it was at Bucknell. And I remember standing on the track, and like the 4x4 was getting ready to go. And I just had this moment where I was like, I don't want to do this. Like, I was like, it was the first time I had actually naturally felt that. I was like, I want to run again. Like, I want to give it a shot. And the interesting thing about that was, several months prior, I was out on the cross country course, and we were out at Mount St. Mary's. It's like a season opener. And I'm running all around, and I'm going from mile 1 to mile 2 to mile 3, and I'm grabbing splits and stuff. And I hear this like booming voice, and it's Centrowitz, like, his voice from anywhere. And he's like, hey, you. And I was like, is he talking to me? I was like, what? Yeah. Hi. He's like, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm coaching. And he's like, I can't get my assistant coaches to run around like that. He's like, you're at Loyola? I said, yeah. He goes, are you an assistant? I was like, no, I'm the head coach. And he's like, what? What's your name? It's like, Julie Culley. He's like, yeah, that name sounds familiar. I was like, yeah, well, you recruited me out of high school. I don't know if you remember that. He's like, nah, I don't remember that. He goes, where did you run? I said, Rutgers. And he goes, yeah. I remember you. He's like, why are you coaching? And I was like, I really like it. He goes, you're too young to coach. He's like, call me if you ever want to get back into running. And like, that was like, I was like, what? No, I don't want to get back into running. Like,
and that's an amazing offer coming from Matt Centrowitz. Like, that is an incredible offer.
Yeah. Well, he slammed the door in my face about 5 more times after I actually approached him to coach me. But so that was in the back of my mind, right? So I went to my AD. I talked to my parents about it after that indoor meet, and they were like, well, what does that mean? I'm like, I don't know. I need a part-time job. I don't know what it's going to look like financially. And so I sat down with our athletic director, like maybe a month or so later, and I just said, this is what I want to do. And he's like, that's awesome. He's like, okay, so can you help me hire the next coach? I said, sure. I'm happy to help you hire. We went and hired Matt Centrowitz's assistant coach. So Brett Harvey, who now is the coach at Ryder, alongside Baumhamer.
Yes, he is.
And so we hired Brett, and at the same time, I was approaching Matt, like, this is typical of Matt. I was like, hey, do you remember me? Like, you kind of said that you would coach me if I got back into it. He's like, I don't remember that.
Was he still coaching over at
he's American.
At American then?
Yeah. And he had Kira Karlstrom on the team at that time, who's now Kira Diamato, breaking American records. And I think Samia Akbar. And so he had a good women's team. The men's team was really good at that time too. Anyway, long story short, I got his phone number and I called him that summer. And I didn't have a plan. I had just left my job. I was hoping to just like find a coach, someone who'd be willing to coach me, and then like move wherever it was that person was. Yeah. So I called him and I was like, I would really like, I'm interested in you coaching me. I knew he had like a small group of like semi-professional individuals in the DC area. And he goes, this was June. And he said, call me in November after you've gotten yourself in shape. And I was like, oh, God, now what? So I went back to the AD and I was like, this is the proposal he gave me. He goes, why don't I make you an assistant coach on the program and you can train alongside the team.
Wow.
And so he literally created a job for me for 1 year just to be able to train with the group and get myself back going again. I called Matt in November. He said, here's a list of people who might want to coach you. Get a piece of paper and a pencil. And I was like, call all of them. No one responded to me. So I basically cried my eyes out to Centrowitz in his office. I drove down to DC, sat in his office and cried until he agreed to coach me. And he was like, God, stop crying. You're pathetic. I just want someone to give me a chance.
Wow. You know what, though? There's something to be said. Anyone that's young that's listening right now, there's something to be said about perseverance, right? Because obviously, Matt obviously agreed to train you, and it became, being highly competitive in the United States, winning a national title, and then going to the Olympics. Like, obviously, if you want something bad enough, like you went through hell just to get to the point of being coached. You could have given up, right? You could have re-gotten that spark and then wanted to go, and then no one wanted to coach you. And it could have been really easy to just go, I have a job at Loyola. I might as well just stay here and blah, 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 and mope to yourself. But you didn't. You decided to mope in an office, and then you got him to coach you. But there's something to be said about that perseverance, right? So that's fantastic. Absolutely. And that's something, that says a lot to you and your character, and to any young athletes that's listening. So far, you've heard a story of something that Dave and I can relate to. A ton of injuries that have, made your career go up and down, up and down. The difference between Julie, Dave, and myself is Julie kept going. Dave and I just stopped. And, and it's a different type of build in person that is able to do what you did, Julie. So you end up getting coached by Matt. You become a pro. You are one of the fastest ladies that has touched American soil, especially in the 5K. What was it like being a pro, traveling, competing nationally, winning the national championship, Olympics? What was that roller coaster like there?
Yeah, it took a while. Like, Matt didn't know what my name was for the first 6 months of being there. I just had to keep showing up. He would call you Speedy or Smiley. He'd be like, what did we do last week, kid? And you're like, we did 5 by 1600. He's like, okay, 6 by a K today. Like, it just was so basic. And then those first, so I started training with him the spring of 2006. And I was still working at Loyola, so I was commuting back and forth. And then I actually made USA's that spring, which was shocking. I made it in the 1500 and got my doors blown off. But I was like, okay, that's a door. That was a window into possibility. And I'm paying my way for everything at this point. There's no funding in the group. So I'm just scrapping it together. I got a job down in DC. I was actually working 50 hours a week, but they let me maneuver the schedule around the practice schedule. So I'd go to work, leave for practice, grab dinner, go back to work till 9 or 10 o'clock at night and start over again. So it's something you can do when you're young, right? I could do it when I was 23, 24, 25, 0% chance I could have done it in my 30s. But we ended up making the trials the next, in 2008. And then, I finished 5th in the trial. No, I can't even remember. 5th, 6th, 7th, something like that in the trials that year. And I remember coach being like, if you can finish this well after a year and a half of training, think about what we could do with 4. And we went on to make 3 world championship teams together in indoor, outdoor, and cross. And then we parted ways. We had a pretty big falling out in 2010. He was going through things in his life. I was going through things in my life, and it just was not meshing. I needed more at that time. I just was reaching a point in my career. I had just signed a contract, my first contract with ASICS, so I didn't have to work anymore. I'd made 3 teams before I got a pro deal.
Jesus.
And I was like, I needed more from him at that point, and he was at a point where he couldn't give. So we parted ways.
Then you come and you train with the legendary Frank Gagliano. I've heard so many great stories about that guy. I mean, he's a legend. What was it like working with Frank?
It was fun. Gags, like I showed up on Gags's doorstep broken. I was like emotionally distraught and physically broken. And he was like, you are a disaster. And we have 2 years to get you ready for the trials. He was awesome. He's definitely tough love. It's just funny, like full circle, like he was a coach at Rutgers, like then he coached at Georgetown, legendary coach at Georgetown, right? Like that's where he made his career and then went into the pro ranks.
Absolutely.
And all the Georgetown alums were like, oh my God, you were coached by Gags. It was like to be coached by Gags. I was like, Gags is like a teddy bear compared to Matt. Matt is so, and they're like, oh yeah. Central's rough. Like he was around for the Enclave. Like it, and by that point in Gags's career, he wasn't as like hard as he was, I think, on like kind of the earlier end of his career. But Gags was awesome. We hit a point in our relationship pretty quickly though, where like I could not handle the training he was giving me. So his system is 3 workouts a week plus a long run. And I just physically couldn't handle that. I'm like, by the time I got to him, I was like 28 and I'm training at the same I'm training like a 22-year-old. I just wasn't recovering the same way.
Yeah.
Plus in the 5K for me, I was like, the long run is a workout. It's not, and it's not an add-on tack on at the end of the week. So I did his system for about 8 months and actually got back to USA's, like ran equal to my PR, finished 5th. It was a world championship year in 20. I'm skipping ahead to 2011 now. But he, like we had gotten there pretty quickly, but it was at the cost of a true base. Right? Like we were doing a lot of speed, a lot of turnover, a lot of 1500 meter work. And then I got into the summer racing season, went overseas and just like fizzled out almost immediately. So we came back and I was like, all right, we got to like go back to the drawing board. Like there are things that worked. And thankfully Matt and Gags had coached the Enclave together. So they knew each other and they're very close. Gags is like a father figure to Matt. And, like I think Gags is Matt's daughter's Lauren's like godfather.
Nice.
So they're really close. So they understood each other's training really well. And Gags was really open. He was like, okay, let's go through what worked with Matt. And then we'll see how it fits into the system that we have with the New Jersey New York Track Club. Because we went from like, there were 5 of us at that time with New Jersey New York Track Club. Aaron Donahue started it essentially to like, it was like 30 of us within like a year because Gags can't say no to anybody because he has a heart of gold.
It definitely blew up and you were see like an NJNY singlet at the start line of any big race. There was at least 1 or 2 of those individuals, male or female. And it was cool to be, being a New York, New Jersey guy, the representation is really cool to see at those big meets.
Yeah. And we were part of making sure it was New Jersey first. We were like, come on, all of us are from Jersey.
Good job.
Sorry, Gags, you're outvoted. It's NJNY. It took so long for people to like say that though. Like they're just like New York, New Jersey, like, correction. New Jersey comes first.
I'm a Jersey boy that now lives in Poughkeepsie, New York, and I said NYNJ a few times, and I looked at it, I'm like, what is wrong with me? New Jersey, New York, damn it.
It's like, this is the heart of it. We're training at Rutgers. Like it was awesome. So we got it going again. And Gags he would write the work. I would come to long run intervals. We're always on Mondays. And then I would do, Thursdays were like a tempo run in the morning. And then, instead of like true speed work, I would do short intervals in the afternoon on Thursday. So I'd tempo in the morning and then come back on tired legs and try to run like 200s, 300s, or 400s and try to get to like 5K pace at like on a tired body. So I would do like 10 or 12 miles in the morning and then come back in the afternoon for that double and then rest on Friday and then do cut down long runs on Saturdays. And that proved to be what worked for me. Like I stayed healthy that year. I was like, I need a day off every week. I took every single Tuesday off and would take the train into the city to get treatment. And I'd spend the day in the city getting treatment, come back and get ready for the rest of the week. So it worked. And I was just thankful to have Gags at that point in my life because Gags is proud. But he's like, he would work with me. And I kind of was like an older member of the team at that point, like maybe more on the veterans side. Erin was definitely the leader, but Erin was starting to kind of have more injury issues at that point. I think she had surgery. So she wasn't quite as present. But then 2012 came, and that was certainly the highlight of my athletic career.
Yeah. That's amazing. A lot of people. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the crazy part about 2012 is like, I knew how well it was going, but no one else knew how well it was going. So it just, I feel like you get to that point and you're like, the only way I'm going to screw this up is if I let my mind get the best of me, because my fitness was there. I was running the best workouts of my life, like had, 8 months of consistent training, of not getting hurt, like of a proper buildup, which for me at that point, I was like, that's a really long time for me to not be hurt.
Yeah.
Just staying on my feet. It was just like, if you can just physically stay on your feet and not overdo it. Like I always remember Matt saying, Centrowitz would say, any day of my career, I would rather be 10% undertrained than 1% over. He's like, it was always a mistake. Always, 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 always to push that line too hard. 10% under, you're hungry, and 1% over, you're toast.
Awesome.
So I wanted so badly to get there, like just fired up. There was a really cool moment that year, like that spring, that I will never forget. So I know I've basically told the whole story. You said to say highlights. I don't think I'm really doing highlights. I'm just going the full story here.
This is amazing.
You're doing amazing. This is fantastic.
I love hearing it because someone that has had your success, right? All we read, if anyone looks up Julie Culley, if they read your Wikipedia, they're going to see record setter at Rutgers. They're going to see national competitor, national champion, Olympian, all this highlights, but they're not going to get the story where I'm listening to this and I'm like, this could be like a dramatic film. Like it really could, like all the injuries. And then like, it could be like even like a comedic section, like crying in office number 1, crying in office number 2. Like there could be like
a lot of tears.
Could be like a cool, like running film created that I think could culturally get people to want to come and watch and consume more running. Because again, all we see is amazing athlete Julie Culley. United States representative, wore the red, white, and blue proud. But we get to see the grind and people get to hear the grind. And we have other things that I want to get to. At this point, I don't give a damn if we get to that because your story is fantastic and fascinating. So go ahead. I want to hear more about this Olympic time that you had and everything going on this year.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was, so that spring, I was actually down here. My boyfriend, now husband, Chris, his name is easy to remember. It's Chris Farley. Anyone who loves old SNL.
There you go.
Chris and I were on a run down here. So I was back up in New Jersey. We were dating long distance, and we were out on the canal. Excuse me. And we're running along. I think it was like an easy run. It was maybe like a medium long day or something. And he's like, what are you thinking about in terms of the trials? I'm going to say it was like the end of March, early April, like not probably around this time. And I was like, well, I just want to finish top 3. Like I would just, if I could finish third, I would be that is the dream. And we were just running along, and he was like, I think you're going to win it. And I was like, win it? Do you know who's going to be in that race? Like Molly Huddle, Lauren Fleshman, like, all the names, right? And Molly was the American record holder at that time. And I was like, win it? I would be happy to make the team. Just life-changing moment to make the team. And you're previewing like what our actual relationship is like. He's like
quick
the
question.
eternal optimist, and I'm the eternal pessimist.
So quick question for you. Was there any point in your career, because you're saying, Lauren Fleshman, Molly Huddle, was there any point in your career when you realized like, I'm one of those names? Like, or were you still looking at it as they're the names and I'm the hungry one chasing them? Because people knew who you were going into that race. Like, people knew that you were a competitor. You were definitely a favorite to make the team, and you were somebody that could definitely win. Like, no one was surprised to see your name winning that, right? So it was like, was there a point where you kind of realized at any point, like, I'm a part of that group, or was there always just that competitor in you that wouldn't put yourself there and would make you chase?
Yeah. I mean, I think like these were the names of my college era, right? Like, these were the women that were dominant from high school, from Foot Locker through NCAAs, and got pro deals right out of school. Like, I had imposter syndrome. Basically my entire career up until this moment, right? Where I just was like, I was always grabbing like scraps, right? Like, I could finish third. I made a world indoor team, but I actually finished third, and Shannon Robury decided not to go. So I slid in, right? So like, there were always these like moments. I just never felt like I nailed it, right? Like, I beat them when they were at their best. I'd never beat Molly. Like, Lauren and I barely ever faced off because she got injured as much as I did. And we always seemed to be injured and on at different times. Yeah. The Kara Goucher, Shalane, they were still running on the track at that point. I think they had made the marathon team then, but you just kind of never know who's coming out of the woodwork. So he stops me dead in my tracks, and he grabs my arms, and he's like, you're going to win this. And I was like, I'm like, yeah. And he goes, look me in the eyes. He's like, you're going to win this. And I wouldn't. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm going to win this. And he's like, Julie, say it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to win this. And he goes, that's not convincing enough. And I was like, I'm going to win this. And from that moment on, I was like, oh, that's the plan.
I'm telling you, dramatic film. Like, this is a dramatic film thing, because then you can go into like the training montage right after that moment. Like, I'm writing this script in my head right now. I'm not lying.
That was the moment, though. Like, that was the moment. I was like, okay, because then I'm like, if I try to win it and come up short, like, maybe I'm still in the top 3, right? And so I just trained like that for the rest of the season. And the crazy thing is, like, I was running fast times, but I'm not like clobbering everybody. Like, I just knew, I always knew my superpower was always my mental strength, right? Like, I knew I was physically talented, but I also knew I could keep my stuff together.
You can curse. This is a podcast. You don't have to hold back.
I could keep my shit together on the day of. Like, that was my superpower. Like, I didn't get crazy in my head. And that's hard, right? Like, to be at this
that's a great
pinnacle moment and not lose your mind.
Probably the best power to have.
Yeah. Cause I was like, I can outsmart people that are more physically gifted than me. I was not the most physically gifted person on the track that day. But that, with the combination of where my fitness was, where my health was, and where my mind was what set me up for success. The day of the trials was like, went through the first round. Julia Lucas was the one to beat at that point. And Molly was there. I mean, there were a lot of players in the field at that point. I think the coolest part about that race is even Let's Run said it was the most dramatic race of the 2012 Olympic trials. And like, still, I think like even 8 to 10 years later, they were writing stories about the buildup of that race because there was so much drama on the track, and not just the Kim Conley story.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was Kim Conley's moment was amazing, but there were so many backstories. There were so many pieces to what was happening there. I remember sitting in my hotel room and my boyfriend Chris came to check on me before he went over to the track. And I usually tried to like close my eyes for a little bit before I would like do final prep and then just physically leave the room. And so I was laying down in the bed, and he came over and he was like, "How you doing?" And I just burst into tears, like another one of my crying moments. And he's like, "Oh my God, are you okay?" And I'm like, I'm just so overwhelmed. Like that, just this emotion, like the gravity of the moment was like starting to hit me. And I just started crying and crying. And he's like, "You're going to be fine. It's just another race. Like, you're going to be fine." And I think like that, crying can be this, obviously it's like an emotional release, but it literally physically releases the body of stress. And so it all came out. Like I literally got all of that anxiety and all of that nervousness out in that moment. And I went over to the track and I was like, I was in the zone. Like, and Gags never had us come over for too long. He didn't want us sitting around. So I walk in and he's like, "You good?" I'm like, "I'm good." He's like, "You want to talk?" I was like, "Nope." He's like, "All right, see you on the other side." And like, I went and sat in the corner and then got my music on and got my workout routine or my warm-up routine going. And then, went into the call room and got stuff ready to go. So there was like a moment in that race, and I like to tell this story because I think it's important for people to remember that like you can still do great things even when you have those like really rough moments. So I was in the race and it was so slow in the beginning, and we're a couple laps in, we're all bunched up and everybody's kind of tripping around a little bit. And I remember thinking to myself, this very conscious memory of this moment, like, you could fall right now and everyone would feel so sorry for you that you lost your moment. Like, you could literally just trip and fall right now, and then it would all be over and you wouldn't have to go do the hard thing. And it was a split second. And I had worked with a coach at that point, like, to work on my mental game, and a sports psychologist. And so we had these like quick turns, because like the negatives are always going to be there, right? It's how you respond to it and how quickly you respond to it. Because if you don't respond to it and you make a bad decision, you could get gapped and lose the whole thing.
Yep.
But I remember that so clearly because I got a little tripped up and I was like, if you fell, it's okay. Like, that would be your story, right? Like, it's really sad. She tripped and fell and she lost touch with the pack. And then snapped back into it. It was like, no. We got a race to run.
The alarms went on.
Yeah. It's like you guys ran like shorter distances. Like, if that split second, things could, shift so fast. But
oh yeah.
And a 5K, you've got a lot of time to think. So you're like, oh God.
But that's a good story, because it just goes to show that you had the opportunity at that point, the biggest race in your life, to just make an excuse, right? And a lot of people do that. They cop out. They make that easy excuse. Well, this went wrong. That went wrong. It wasn't my fault, and instead of embracing that, you didn't, and you pushed it aside. And I think that there's a lot of, that's a story, not just for running, not just for athletes, but that's something for life, right? Because we can blame a ton of things on a ton of different people for what went wrong at any point in our life. But instead, if you just be mentally tough and snap out of that, it could change your life forever, right? And it certainly did for you at that moment.
Yeah. The race was wild. Like, you tend to black out certain parts of it. Like you just can't physically remember, like your body's under enough stress.
Yeah.
I remember when Julia made her big move, and I remember thinking, because it was so definitive, I remember thinking, all right, we're racing for 2-3. And Molly Huddle and I were great friends at the time and still good friends. And she and I used to train together in the winters in Phoenix. And she was more experienced in championship racing, although younger than me. She was more experienced in championship racing than I was. And I remember thinking, just keep an eye on her. Like, she's got great instincts. And so she started to pick up the pace and start to string the field out. But it took a while, I think, for the two of us even to think like we had a shot at the win anymore.
Yeah.
With about 1,000 meters to go, maybe it was a little less than that. Maybe it was more like 800 meters to go. We could see she wasn't gaining any space anymore. And if anything, she was starting to come back a little bit. And it's almost like Molly and I saw it at the same time, because the two of us just took off. And I don't even remember that moment entirely. I just remember like we're moving and we're moving fast, and like, we're going to close this gap and we're going to see if we can get there before the end of the race. And with 500 left, she was coming back pretty quick. We ended up passing her with 250 meters to go. And I remember thinking, like, when you pass her, because you don't know, right? Like I knew she was struggling, but maybe it was like, because, people are coming, right? So you start to slow up and then you want to grab onto the pack.
Yeah.
I remember thinking, like, when you go by her, you have to go by her definitively. And, Molly and I went around her, and then there was a gap back to like 4 or 5 at that point. It was fairly significant. Mm-hmm. And with 200 meters to go, I remember thinking, this is how it's supposed to be. Molly wins the race and I get second. She's the American record holder. And I was like, this is awesome. This is so perfect. Just don't fall. Like, whatever you do now, don't fall. But you're coming around that 200 so fast, and the stadium is berserk. Like, it just is, you can't feel or think or anything. And as I was coming around, like maybe 125 to go, I was like, all right, just come up on her shoulder. So you're coming around the Bowerman curve, and I start to swing a little bit onto her shoulder, and she reacts and moves out into almost lane 2. And so I take this like really quick step into lane 1, and now I have a full-on shot at the finish line.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, thank you. And I came up on her shoulder, and that was the first time I remember hearing the crowd.
Wow.
And it was this amazing feeling, because I was like, there's a lot going on in track and field at any given moment. Like, there's people throwing on the infield. There could be somebody jumping. Like, I thought they were screaming for something that had just happened, like, a great moment. And I started to come up on her shoulder, and the crowd was just like roaring. And I was like, oh my, it was like this very clear moment. I was like, oh my God, they're cheering for us. It's like, I never experienced that before. And it was like those last few moments where I was like, I still have one more gear. And I was like, let's just see what happens. Because the body a lot of times like holds back from that final space. It's like you almost protect yourself from that like last edge. Because if you go too far, like that's when you start to, like the body just starts in chaos.
Yep.
And I'd never had that moment before. I was like, there's one more like ounce. And so I threw down, and that's when I went by and came across the line. And I was like, oh my God. I was looking around. I was like, did I get DQ'd? I was like, did I get DQ'd? And then they turn around and
because you're.
What's that?
I was saying, and all because your boyfriend told you in April, he made you say you're going to win.
I know. I have to credit. I'll give him all the credit. I'll tell him another time, though.
But that honestly, like, just your dramatic retelling of that. Like, again, Dave and I, we were good athletes. We're not elite athletes. We've talked to some, of the best. We talked to Johnny Gray, which was amazing. One of the greatest 800-meter runners in history. And it's like, he didn't get into that detail. I've never, outside of just seeing like some interviews, which are short snippets, right? Like, we have this nice, cool form of podcast where you just got to retell that so vividly. It's bizarre. I felt like I was there in your head being in this race. And that was really cool. That was one of the coolest moments. I've been podcasting for damn well almost 7 years now. That might've been the coolest moment that I've ever had in podcasting. Like that was
incredible.
That was awesome.
Yeah.
No, it was so cool. And then in that moment, it's like I crossed the finish line and I'm like grabbing Molly because we just did this thing together and we're friends and we're going to be on the team. And then we're waiting to see what happens at third. Like, we literally turned around. We're like, oh my God, who's our last teammate? And we see this finish, right? And we're like, oh my God, what just happened? And I barely knew Kim at that point, but I'm like, oh my God, oh my God. And we're just waiting, right? Like, they've got the huge Jumbotron and we're just waiting for the timing system to pull like the results up. And Kim is like, every nanosecond is a lifetime because she doesn't know if she hit the time or was she third or like what the camera said. And then they finally just went boop, boop, boop with like the results. And then they literally put the Olympic rings next to your name.
That's incredible.
It was like my name, Olympic rings. That was the
chills.
first time I was like, oh my God, I did it. Like, they actually are saying I made the team. And then Molly came across and then Kim came across and we just went crazy. Kim was like, I mean, that was the most incredible moment. And then obviously in that same moment is this like massive devastation with Julia too.
Yeah.
And it was like, it's so hard because they literally like escort everybody off the track except for those three. And you're like quickly handed so we just went into this like joyous state, right? And in shock. And we can't believe we did the thing together and we're going to London and this is incredible. But it is just as elated and as amazing as those moments are. It's like, everybody else that ever dreamt of this is going home. And I think that's just what makes it so unique and so amazing is like the stars have to align too, right? Like life stress, relationship stress, like a traumatic event could happen, like an injury, you could slip off a curb. Like I go to the negative, but I'm like, there's so many things that can go wrong. Like when it does actually come together, it is like magic. Like you're still in control and you're still have to make the right decisions and prepare your body and prepare your mind. But it's like, you also have to have a little bit of luck.
And track is such a bizarre sport, right? Because you and Molly just get done battling, absolutely battling. And to turn around the moment that finish line crosses, the fact that you guys both experienced that amount of pain, that amount of work together, you just turn around, the competition's over and you can begin to be happy for each other. And then I don't think there's many sports like that where you can share that with an actual fierce competitor. So before we got to go, I do want to talk about your Olympic experience. What was it like heading over to London and competing in, the 2012 Olympic Games? Because there's only so many people ever that can call themselves Olympians, and you're one of those people. So what was that experience like?
It was amazing. I mean, I think being part of Team USA is extra exceptional. Like you get a lot of gear at that point, a lot of Nike gear. And at that time, and they still call it this, is it's the hardest team to make. It's the hardest team to make in the world, head to toe. Right. We have some countries that are stronger in certain areas than others, but head to toe, it is by far the hardest team to make in one of the 2/3 most celebrated sports at the Olympics. And the original reason we have there's so many special things about being part of that sport. Yeah. There's a lot of sports at the Olympics. There's a lot of sports that come and go and come back again. And it depends on which way the wind's blowing if it's going to be at the Olympics, like track and swimming and gymnastics. And some of these sports are just so core to it.
Yeah.
So I think it just feels that much more significant. It is the epitome of a sport. It's not like we only have our minor players go, or we only have the NBA Hall of Famers go when they feel, when it works with their schedules or something. Like, it is the epitome of our sport. I think there's just an extra level of pride to be a part of that team. And then having it in London was just fantastic. It's literally the last Olympics we've had that hasn't been chaotic. Like 2016 was Zika virus, and 2020/2021 was COVID.
Yeah.
So to really embrace the full experience of sold out stadiums and the city just being electric I just feel very thankful and privileged to have been a part of that. It was amazing.
So, Julie, like I said, there were other things. We had to have you on again because I do want to talk.
Part 2 coming soon.
Coming soon. We're definitely going to have you on. I definitely want to have you on again, but it was well worth spending this hour to hear your career and your story so much in depth. And, you started off this by saying, hey, mother of 3, I have no memory. And, I haven't even talked about my boys. But, it was great. I do have to give a shout out, though, because you do have a running store with your husband, Pacers Running. Give a little shout out, talk about Pacers, give us a little synopsis and tell people about your store.
Yeah, so Pacers has been in the Farley family since 2001, I think. I'm probably getting that wrong. So I married into the family. Chris and his parents originally owned it, and then Chris bought his parents out somewhere around 2015 or so. And it's busy. It's busy being a store owner. He really is the one that does all the management of the day-to-day. He has a absolute true partner in his partner, Kathy, and they are the best of partners because they have two different strengths. But there's multiple facets of our running stores. We have 5 brick and mortar right now. We have a third-party Amazon business, and actually something really cool that we just started in the last year is something called Relay. And you can find it through runpacers.com, but we are refurbishing running shoes. So what we're doing is we're taking shoes that normally get sent to a landfill. They're returns that are brought back to the brands. So a return could be something that has a scuff mark on it and is then tossed into a landfill or just donated. We are bringing life back into these. And so we go through a checkpoint process and get them cleaned up and make sure that they're acceptable. And then we're selling them at a reduced price on our website. So our vendors are happy because we're giving more life. It's better for the environment. And then it's actually helping us bring more individuals into the sport and getting them into a really good pair of top running shoes that they're not paying $160 for. And that's definitely a barrier in our sport. And then we're donating a lot to high schools across the country. We've connected with, especially being in the running community, it's a very small community. So even some pro runners who have different, Ben Blankenship has a incredible nonprofit that he started out in Eugene. So he and I connected, and he's going to be doing some stuff with Relay. We have some different high schools and stuff that we've been working with in the DC area. So that's a really neat part of our business, especially if you have any kids or individuals who you're trying to get into the sport, but that's a barrier to it, or just don't want to spend as much money for a really good pair. So you guys should check it out. But thank you for the plug.
Yes.
Stores, we have an online business, so we ship anywhere. We used to own the New Jersey Marathon, and we can't get that back up online. If you have any insight on the shore, going through 7 different townships and districts to get all the police in alignment has been a bit of a challenge for us, and the mayors too. So we've struggled to get that one back online since COVID, but we still have hope.
I do. I can probably get in touch with the Manchester mayor. That's probably my extent. So I don't know how much that will help. But I really appreciate you coming on. The last thing I want to ask you, and we ask a lot of our members, and I think what you guys are doing with the Pacers Relay might actually fit into this, but how do we grow this sport in America? We enjoy the sport. Us 3 love this sport, and we think it's great. And people that run think it's great, but it doesn't have that common fan, right? It doesn't have like football, basketball, baseball that sit on the couch and watch a track meet. Even if we pick our favorite event or our favorite athlete, like people don't know the athletes until Olympics time. Or if we have Worlds at Eugene, this past Worlds, people got to know. But, outside of maybe a few like Sydney McLaughlin or maybe, Noah Lyles, but there's not many people that know a lot of the faces and the great athletes we have in the track community. Do you have any ideas of how we can get this started where we can get fans in more of a casual level?
Yeah, I worked, we didn't even touch upon Brooks, but as sports marketing manager, I oversaw all of our pro athletes and then our youth programs. I think youth is where it's at. You guys have kids, I have kids, they're into sports, right? And they're learning basketball and baseball and soccer from 4 years old and onward. And then to understand the sport better, they're turning it on the television, right? So they start to follow players and their parents are following stuff. I think that's where, especially a parent that wasn't involved in that sport starts to get involved and starts to understand a little bit more. I'm not an advocate of children running hard and fast when they're young, but I am interested in starting a youth track club in Arlington. We don't have one down here. I just want kids to learn to love it. And I think the more that they get involved at a young age, they're being sectioned off in all these sports by the time they're 7. They're on travel baseball or travel soccer or travel lacrosse or whatever that might be. Getting them involved in something like running, just introducing it at a younger age, I think it gets the kids involved. It actually helps strengthen the high school programs and the middle school programs. Yep. If it's done right, we obviously see where they can get a little out of control and there's too much emphasis placed on it and the athletes are burnt out by the time they get to college. Yeah. If it's done right and you encourage the sport at a healthy effort level at a young age, you bring the parents into it, you start to build this fandom from there. So I'm a proponent for youth. But my kids, I don't want them on a track team this young. I just want them to learn to love it, do a 5K, just get involved. So
I like it.
That's my answer.
I also liked how New Balance brought Sydney McLaughlin to the high school indoor national meet so that kids can be around and see and interact with a lot of the pros. I think that's kind of what you were talking about too. Get the youth more involved because that's the next generation. That
social media connection is massive. Yeah, when you've got an athlete like Sydney, who young women and boys too look up to. I mean, and her interaction with that crowd is huge. So we do need the pros to make sure that they're doing a good job of setting a good example as much as they can. They are athletes, they are entertainers, that's part of the gig. And also part of that is making sure that they connect. And so I think the more that brands can do that, as part of the encouragement, it's different. We have a different structure. It's just different. So we have to look at it differently. It's never going to be the same as any other sport.
Certainly. I agree. So again, she's Julie Culley. She's a 2012 Olympiad in the 5K, all around great ambassador for the sport. If you could hear, has an amazing story, which I'm going to pitch out to Hollywood and I will get all the credit. And Julie, I will give you no money. I will give it to Chris for making you a national champion. He'll get it. But no, overall, it was great. Go on Twitter. You can find Pacers running their store at Run Pacers. Go find Julie Julie on Twitter at Julie Culley. There, it's easy to find there. And once again, really love having you on, Dave. Anything else before we got to jump out of here?
No, I mean, like, just hearing that story was so, like, I was just captivated by everything. Like, I remember seeing Julie when I was at Rutgers, and like just how proud. Like, I remember texting a lot of my old teammates at Rutgers during, like, right before the Olympic trials, and then during the Olympics, and there was just this great sense of pride and joy, and it just couldn't have happened to a better person. And I'm just thrilled that you came on our little podcast and were able to share such
sweet. This was so
an amazing
fun.
journey.
Thanks for inviting me, guys. I love it. And that was the best part of having that experience, was like just getting to share it. Like, I just love to hear the stories. It's fun. It's no fun having something like that happen if you don't get to share it. So
there you go.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I loved being here. It was really cool to be with you guys. Great to see you, Dave. Nice to meet you guys.
Yeah, and
Yes.
we love giving that platform. And again, easily the most gripping story I've heard. So if you like what you heard, please like, share, follow, subscribe, rate us 5 stars. Find us on socials at Talking in Ovals. Spread this word of mouth. Once again, she's Julie Culley. I'm Alex Cuesta. That's Dave Hyatt. We will be back again next week. So long, everybody.